A lot of information in a short time about troubleshooting specifically in operation of your clock, whether this is Mantle, wall clock, Cuckoo clock, or grandfather clock. First thing we have to talk about the winding system. This particular clock called American Mantle kitchen clock has a strike on a half hour, an hour as well. 7 days clock as long as you will wind the clock fully wound out. Let me show you the way, particularly how this clock needs to be wound. One spring for strike, second spring for time. Now, right now, I'm winding the time system. It's fully wound, and on the way to wind this clock up, need to be wound clockwise. If we'll check another side, basically on the way this striking point needs to be wound counterclockwise. What I want to point it out, every single clock has the different way wind system. Can be clockwise or counterclockwise. Please make sure you check direction on your clock before you will wind this clock up. This particular clock is 7 days clock, and like I mentioned before, as long as you will wind the fully wound. How can you make sure not to overwind the clock, not to break the mainspring? In this direction, basically, I would advise you, especially after we fix your clock, wind the clock twice a week just to make sure you're not going to overwind your clock. Most cases even count how many turns you will put on the clock just to make sure the next week, let's say if this week you did 7 turns, next week you can do it maybe 8 to 9, and a week later you can do it maybe a little more. That's a way for you to know how to make sure you're not going to overwind the clock, and when you learn a little more, you don't have to wind this clock up really, and you don't have to really overwind the clock. So this is all about your winding system. 7 days clock, when you fully wind this clock up, but in the first 2 weeks, please wind this clock up twice a week. Please also check direction of your winding system, whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise. Now we're turning our attention about this pendulum sound. You probably can hear the tic-tac sounds while the pendulum swings back and forth. What I want to demonstrate in the video actually is the sound of this clock. Reason why, when you're going to set this clock in your mantle, okay, we want to make sure when pendulum swing back and forth, clock specifically will make even tic-tac sounds. A lot of people simply put a level at your mantle or level in your clock, and basically will check if level is fine, why clock doesn't work. And here's the reason. The final adjustment besides the level should be adjusted by sound. We always want to make sure the clock will make even tic-tac sound in your place. Excuse me. That's what I want to recommend in this case now. It sounds almost even. It doesn't sound perfect, but it sounds almost even. Now we do know if you're going to get this sound at your place, you should not have any problem. Now, how can we make sure you're going to get this sound in your place? Let me just show you an example. If I'm going to lift this size up a little bit, you can clearly hear the sound slightly change. Again, because I had to lift the right side here. If I'm going to put a clock back, clock will get normal sound. That's what we're looking for now. Now, we're not sure what level of your mantle at your place. It's one of the reasons why we want to point it out. Final adjustment should be made by not level of your clock, by sound, to make sure the clock will make even tic-tac sound. If I'm going to try to lift this size, same thing, basically the sound slightly change, and in this direction, if you're going to leave a clock like that, clock will simply stop. Now, I just showed you an example where clock's simply sitting on a case and make this very good sound, which you really shouldn't have any problem. But what we're concerned about, if you're going to put the mantle clock into your mantle, and if for some reason it's not going to sound exactly like metronome, in other words, it doesn't sound even in the way like we're looking at it, then clock needs your help. Put something underneath of this side, or maybe on this side as well too. All can be done just from your experiment when you're going to listen for the sound, and I want to ask you specifically, ask this question yourself. Is this sound even? If answer will be no, please go ahead and do whatever you can possibly can to level this clock by putting something underneath of this side of the case or another side of the case as well too. This is extremely important for you to know to make sure it's going to sound even. Now we're turning our attention for speed up or slow down on your clock if your clock running, in other words, fast or slow. On the bottom of your pendulum in this case, you have special adjustment regulation screw. Okay, this is your really pendulum. In some cases it's just a regular yellow disc, which we call pendulum. On the bottom of the pendulum again, this special regulation screw which you can adjust it. If you're gonna lower this screw, in other words, if you're gonna make counterclockwise turn, the disc will lower down and the clock will slow down. If you're gonna make clockwise turn, the pendulum will, the disc actually will erase a little up, and at this point clock will speed it up. So here's basically the formula how we usually say. Lower, slower. Erase pendulum up will speed it up. This is a way for you to adjust more accurate time in your home, whether your clock running fast or slow. On the French clocks, directly in the Mantle French clock, the pendulum wouldn't have any adjustment on the bottom, but when you look at the face of the clock, it should be adjustment above number 12 on a dial, or maybe around this area, which you're going to have to get special key to adjust clock. I'm talking about the mostly French clock, if clock running fast or slow. Please check your clock to find out which direction you need to go to slow down or speed up your clock. Every time, on every clock, including grandfather, wall, mantle, cuckoo clock as well too, every time when you have to restart the pendulum, please do this gently, slowly, as much as you can. By the way, everything you do in this clock, please take your time, try to follow direction, and don't try to make any mistakes about it, because again, this is a T clock, and any of this clock which I'm trying to give you direction needs special attention. To stop the clock, the same way basically, you can just stop your pendulum. Pendulum after automatically will stop a second later. Same idea to restart the pendulum as well. So far we were just talking about your winding system, we were talking about the sound of the tick-tock. We also were talking about to adjust your pendulum if clock running fast or slow. Now let's turn our attention, how can we set the right time in this clock? In order to set the right time, we have to move the minute hand forward. While we're going to move the minute hand forward in this particular clock, we're going to hear some striking sound. Generally speaking, while clock striking, just let it strike until you're going to go to the next. I'm sorry, this clock actually doesn't have any strike on a half hour, which I pointed out before I thought it had, but it doesn't. Now, most of the Mantle clock has strike on a half hour, an hour too. While you're going to move this minute hand, you're going to move the minute hand slowly, because we just heard the click sound, and I really want to invite your attention to slow down as much as you can to get this click sound. While you're going to continue to move the minute hand, you're going to go to number 12. Again, you're going to hear your clock start to strike. Please let it strike. Reason why specifically talking about this click sound, whether it's your clock going to strike in a half hour or an hour, if you didn't get the click sound, which a lot of people basically try to move the hands fast enough, and you're going to pass this click, what's going to happen next, let's say if your clock read 11 o'clock, chances are your clock maybe would not strike 11 times. Same idea could be in a half hour as well too. If you're going to miss the click, chances are your clock wouldn't strike in a half hour. It is a way to correct this problem if something will happen. You're going to have to count exactly how many times your clock striking, and you also need to move our hand to the same number to match up your strike count. This is a way for you to match time and a right strike. After you're going to do that, the time will be right in your case. Then you simply take the big minute hand and you continue in the normal way to move hands forward only. Please never move minute hand backwards, never. And continues to move the hands until you're going to set up the right time again. So once again, if your clock doesn't strike the correct time, for example, if it's 10 o'clock and strike 12, and simply strike 2 hours ahead, you're going to have to count how many times your clock striking. and please move our hand carefully, slowly. In other words, rotate the other hand to the same number whatever your strike was. After you did that, please move the minute hand forward in order to set the right time. Then I want to invite your attention quickly about this wall clock direction. Same idea like we were just talking about the Mantle clock, but the sound of the tick-tock on a wall clock should be adjusted on the wall by moving the case either on the left, that's what I'm doing now, or slightly on the right side as well too. So the difference between Mantle clock and wall clock, only because on the way to make sure it's going to sound even, you're going to have to adjust from the left on the right, and in this particular clock and the Mantle clock, you're going to have to put something underneath of your case to adjust your clock. Cuckoo clock. Specifically, we're talking about the cuckoo clock. This one-day cuckoo clock could be also 8-day cuckoo clock as well too. These two weights need to be wound once a week. I'm sorry, just every day the weights need to be wound in this case, and on an 8-day clock, once a week. When weight is wound, you're going to have to restart your pendulum. Same idea, you're going to have to adjust the case, and please listen for a tick-tock sounds to make sure it's even. After you know for sure this is a way for your clock to sound, then you can do the clock alone. Now I want to show you a way to adjust speed up or slow down in the pendulum. This is your pendulum and a cuckoo clock. You can push it to lower it, or you can erase this pendulum to speed it up. This is the difference between pendulum and a Mantle or wall clock compared to the cuckoo clock. Now I want to turn your attention to Mantle or wall clock, which has every quarter chime, Westminster chime, Winnington sound, and St. Michael sound. Usually these modern clocks actually has self-adjust striking system, which allowed you to set the time quick enough without let a clock chime quarterly or on a half hour. So the right idea, let's say if you want to set the right time in your clock, you always have to wind this clock up first before you do anything else, and then you take the big minute hand and you try to move this minute hand forward while clock chiming, so you don't have to worry about it. Again, while clock chime, please move the minute hand until you're going to set the right time. When you set right time, self-adjust tracking system will catch everything, and self-adjust system will self-adjust everything for you. What's going to happen if you will let a clock chime quarterly, once in a while you're not going to hear your clock chime. Okay, and basically the chime and striking time will be definitely off. So actually I will advise you every time, again, when you want to set the right time, it's your Mantle clock which has quarter chime. Please wind this clock up first and reset the time by moving the minute hand forward while clock chiming. Everything else, basically, whatever we were just talking about, the Mantle, cuckoo clock, and wall clock, you can transfer to possibly any different clock you can have maybe at your home, or like we were just talking about. You can definitely transfer this to grandfather clock as well. One thing I want to point it out, after you set your clock up, whether this is wall clock or Mantle clock, if anybody clean your house, please do not let anybody touch your clock. Please make sure this is going to be really your place for your clock, because a lot of time whoever cleaned the house, they're going to move clock a little bit and then they put it in the same position. You're going to have to do the same work again about even or uneven tick-tock sounds in your place. This is basically just a briefly troubleshooting instruction for your clock. I'm sure we didn't talk about many different things which we can't really in this short videotape. But if you do have any additional problem, and if you need any additional information, you can call us at area code 301-942-3794. We'll be trying to help you as much as we can. Thanks very much for listening. Kensington Clock Shop.